Story 1, Marked by the Beast. I never believed in the old stories, but now I wish I had. It was mid-October, and the first signs of frost were just starting to nip at the edges of the farmland. My family had owned the land for generations, tucked away in a forgotten valley, surrounded by dense woods that stretched for miles. It wasn't unusual to feel isolated out here. The trees pressed close, their thick branches forming a natural wall that kept the rest of the world out. But lately, that sense of solitude had become oppressive, suffocating. There was a stillness in the air, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The animals were the first to notice. Our cattle had been growing more restless with each passing night. They'd gather at the far end of the pasture, their eyes wide, fixated on the line where the trees met the field. At first, I figured it was wolves or coyotes, something ordinary. But when I went to check the fence one evening, I found strange tracks, large clawed prints that didn't match any animal I'd seen before. It felt like something was watching me from the shadows, but when I looked, the woods were silent. That night, I woke to the sound of laughter, soft, childlike giggling carried on the wind. I lay still, my heart racing, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a trick of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I found markings on the barn doors, scratches deep enough to split the wood, carved in strange patterns that looked almost like symbols. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were a warning, but I had no idea what they meant. That's when I decided to visit Old Man Ben, a recluse who lived deeper in the valley. Some said he was crazy, others said he knew more about the land than anyone around. Either way, I needed answers. Ben's cabin was barely more than a shack hidden among the trees. When I arrived, he didn't seem surprised to see me. He stared at me with those clouded eyes of his and said, "The beasts marked you." His voice was a low rasp, and the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. He motioned for me to sit, his gaze distant as he spoke. "That land you're on, it's old. Older than you or me. The things that walk through those woods, they ain't natural. They were there long before we came, and they'll be there long after we're gone. The symbols on your barn, they're a sign. You've drawn the attention of something you don't understand, and now it's hungry." I wanted to laugh it off, but the weight of his words pressed on me like a stone. He gave me a bundle of herbs and muttered instructions about burning them around the farm, saying it might keep the beast at bay. But even he didn't seem convinced. "There's no running from it once it's chosen you," he said before I left, his eyes full of pity. That night, the temperature plummeted. The air felt heavy like a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. I followed Ben's instructions, lighting the herbs around the perimeter of the farm. As the smoke curled into the night, a low growl echoed from the woods. My skin prickled with dread. The noises started again. Whispers, laughter, footsteps that crunched through the frost-covered grass, but no one was there. And then I saw it. A shadow moving between the trees, too tall to be a man, too fluid to be an animal. It stayed at the edge of the field, just beyond the reach of the firelight. My body froze, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The figure stopped and slowly turned its head, revealing glowing eyes that burned into me from the darkness. My breath caught, and I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. The air grew colder, and for a moment, the world felt like it was unraveling around me. The beast was no longer just a shadow in the woods. It was here, and it was coming for me. I ran back to the house, bolting the doors behind me, but the noises didn't stop. Scratching at the windows, low growls beneath the floorboards, and that same eerie laughter echoing through the walls. I knew then that it wasn't just after the farm. It was after me. The next morning, the symbols on the barn were gone. The tracks had vanished, and the air was unnaturally still, but I knew it wasn't over. The beast had marked me, and now it was only a matter of time. Every night since, I've heard it, circling the house, waiting, watching. I don't know how long I can keep it out. But one thing's for sure. Whatever that thing is, it's not done with me yet. And the worst part? I don't think it ever will be. Story 2. The Night Watcher. The first time I saw the shadow, I told myself it was just a trick of the moonlight. Farming late into the night makes your mind play games, and out in the countryside, the shadows seem to have a life of their own. But what I saw wasn't just any shadow. It had weight, substance, a lurking presence that watched from the edges of my fields, just beyond the reach of my tractor's headlights. Our farm sits on land that my grandfather always warned us about. There's a reason no one built here before us, he used to say, but we laughed it off as an old man's superstitions. We didn't listen when he spoke about the Night Watcher, a creature from the old stories, something he claimed stalked the forests at the edge of our land. It comes out when the moon's high looking for trespassers, he'd say, and we'd just roll our eyes. But now I wish we'd listened. It started small, missing animals, mostly chickens. I figured it was a fox or maybe a coyote. Then the barn cats disappeared. It wasn't until the cows started acting strange that I knew something was really wrong. They huddled together at night, restless, eyes locked on the tree line, as if waiting for something to come out. Their fear seeped into the air like a cold fog, making the farm feel wrong, like the land itself was unsettled. One evening, while checking the fences, I found more than just damage. There were deep gouges in the wood, as if something with claws had shredded it. The smell in the air was foul, like rotting flesh, but I couldn't find any carcass. That's when I saw it again, just beyond the fence, a tall, spindly figure, its silhouette barely visible against the dimming sky. My heart pounded. My fingers gripped the shotgun I always carried when I checked the perimeter at night. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. And then, as if it melted into the air itself, it was gone. I told my wife about it, but she brushed it off as fatigue. "You've been working too hard," she said. But I knew it wasn't exhaustion. Something was out there, watching, waiting. The Night Watcher. A week later, I woke up to the sound of the cows screaming. When I reached the pasture, my flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something crouched low, dragging one of the calves toward the woods. The thing was massive, its limbs too long, its skin too pale under the moonlight. It moved with an unnatural grace, like it didn't belong in this world. I fired the shotgun, and it froze. For a moment, its head turned, and I swear it smiled. A grotesque, unnatural grin that sent ice down my spine. It let go of the calf, retreating back into the trees without a sound, leaving only the silence of the night. That's when I knew the old stories were true. The Night Watcher wasn't just a legend, it was real, and it was hunting on our land. I went to see an elder in the nearest town, a man who knew the stories better than anyone. He listened to my account, nodding grimly, then told me what I had feared. The Night Watcher claims what it wants. Once it's seen you, once it's been on your land, it's marked you. It doesn't stop until it's taken what it's come for. His words echoed in my mind as I drove home, the cold settling deep into my bones. I knew now that I wasn't just protecting my farm. I was protecting my family from something far worse than any predator. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, shotgun across my lap, waiting. Around midnight, the air grew thick, oppressive, like the land itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. The creak of the boards under the weight of something too heavy to be human. My hands trembled as I gripped the gun, eyes fixed on the door. The knob turned, but the door didn't open. A long, slow scrape of claws followed the edge of the frame, and then silence. It's been 3 nights since then. The watcher hasn't returned, but I know it's still out there. It's only a matter of time. I don't know what it wants, if it's after me or the land or something else entirely. But I do know one thing. It won't stop until it gets what it came for. Story 3. The Eyes in the Cornfield. I never liked working the fields at night, but during the harvest, sometimes you don't have a choice. It was late September and the corn was high, creating an eerie maze that stretched far into the distance. The tractor's headlights sliced through the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the rows. I should have stopped working when the sun went down, but I was behind schedule, and the weather forecast promised rain for the next week. So I stayed. I was halfway through the southern field when the engine sputtered and died. Cursing under my breath, I climbed down to check the fuel. That's when I heard it. The soft rustle of corn stalks moving, like something was walking through them. At first I thought it was just the wind, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I stood there, flashlight in hand, scanning the rows. The beam flickered over the tall stalks, revealing nothing but corn as far as the light reached. But the rustling continued, growing closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, the weight of something watching me from within the corn. My heart raced and I backed up toward the tractor, my fingers fumbling for the radio to call the house. That's when I saw them, 2 glowing eyes peeking out from the stalks, reflecting the beam of my flashlight. They were too high up to belong to any animal I knew, too still to be human. My stomach dropped, and I stood frozen, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I blinked, and the eyes were gone. But the rustling didn't stop. It was moving again, faster this time, circling the field. Whatever it was hunting me. I ran to the tractor, trying to restart the engine, but the damn thing wouldn't turn over. The rustling grew louder, the stalks shaking violently now. I grabbed the shotgun from the back of the tractor, spinning around as the sound closed in. The corn parted, and for a split second I saw it. A tall, gaunt figure, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones, eyes glowing like embers in the night. It disappeared back into the corn before I could fire, leaving me in a cold sweat. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I finally got the tractor started and tore across the field, not daring to look back. When I reached the house, I locked every door and window, sitting up all night with the shotgun by my side. But the eyes, those glowing eyes, they were burned into my mind. I asked around town the next day, hoping someone might have an explanation. Most folks dismissed it as exhaustion, but an old farmer, Willard, pulled me aside. "You saw the corn spirit," he said, his voice low. "It doesn't like being disturbed, especially not at night. You're lucky it didn't follow you home." That night I didn't sleep, and for the next week, every time the wind rustled through the corn, I wondered if it was coming back. I moved the harvest to daylight hours after that, but the feeling never left me. The land had changed, the air thick with something unseen, something that didn't belong to me or any living creature. And I knew, deep down, I wasn't alone out there.